This happened to me in my early 30s back in 2016. I was staying at my grandparents' cabin for vacation up in a very secluded area of Wisconsin during the winter. It wasn't anything too special, just a one-story cabin with a 2-bedroom and 2-bathroom type thing. The appropriate sized cabin for a couple, you could say. One evening, I was on the couch watching a movie on the flat screen TV when I heard a loud knock at the door. I then thought to myself, who could be knocking on the door this late into the day? Keep in mind, I was basically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests, so it was odd to have someone knock on your door. I opened the door, expecting to see someone, but I didn't see anyone. Assuming it was probably ding-dong ditchers, I went back on the couch to finish the movie I was watching, when a second knock came. This time, much louder than the first knock. I sighed and got up and asked, "Who's out there?" There was no answer. I then asked again if anyone was out there, but all I got in response was dead silence. In fact, it seemed as if the only thing I heard was the howling wind and snowfall in the distance. I opened the door, but there was still nobody outside, and I didn't really expect to see anyone there. I put on my snow boots and walked out into the cold, looking for anyone who could be hiding anywhere. I checked behind my car, around the cabin, and even went as far as checking into the brush, but there was no sign of anyone. Finally, I walked back inside the cabin and closed the door. The very second I closed the door, the loud frantic knocking came back, and I yanked the door open, only to see absolutely no one. I felt disturbed and locked the door, and I felt as if I were being watched by something in those woods. It was a very unsettling feeling, a sense of dread and concern. The next day, I packed up and left the cabin back to my apartment building. My grandparents have been up there ever since, but there was no signs of break-ins or anything like that. I don't want to describe my experience in full detail, because I know what happened. I just can't even begin to explain it. When I was 12, I lived in the country with both my parents somewhere in South Texas. We lived on somewhat of a ranch during this time, which was nice seeing as we had owned a lot of land and cattle. I was home alone one Saturday evening as my parents had gone out grocery shopping, leaving me to tend to the house. I was in my room trying to occupy myself by playing some video games on my computer when I heard my dad's voice call me from downstairs. "David." I figured that they must have been home, so I walked downstairs and yelled for my dad. But there was no answer, just complete silence. Eventually, I dismissed it as me hearing things and started heading back upstairs when I heard my dad call out for me again. "David?" This time, it seemed to be coming from outside of the house. I went out through the back door, calling for my dad, looking for him, when I noticed that his car wasn't even in the driveway. It was freaky as hell, but I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and continued my game. One more time, I began hearing the distinct voice of my dad call out to me from downstairs, and I knew I heard it this time. I called my dad on the phone and asked him if he was home, to which he replied no and that they were still at the store. I haven't told anyone else about this story, and half of me wants to believe that it might have been my imagination, but I was sure it was not. This story is told in the perspective of a female. When I was around 24, I had just graduated from college and I just bought my first house in Massachusetts with my fiancé. The house wasn't anything too special. It was just a simple house that was appropriate for 1 or 2 people. Anyway, my fiancé had a full-time job, so he would always be the one to take care of me when I was home. One night, my fiance went to work as he had been called in for a possible storm emergency while I stayed home to look after our dog and finish unpacking. I had a mini dachshund named Buddy at the time. Big bark, small bite. Anyway, I'm heating up some food when I hear the dog barking by the stairs that led down into the basement. When I looked down, I could see that our basement door was wide open. I didn't even dream of going down there, but his barking became more defensive, and I knew that something wasn't right. When I reached the bottom step, I tried looking around for anything he could have been barking at, when I hear a loud cackle from across the basement. I didn't dare shine my light in that direction. I simply walked back up the stairs and locked the basement door. I have yet to hear that cackle since, and me nor my fiance has found anyone down there. I was 15 years old at the time of this story, and this just happened recently during the pandemic. Both my parents are nurses and take care of patients, and their scheduled times would constantly shift, so it was common for me to be home alone for a few hours a day. I was home alone one night, cleaning the kitchen and whatnot, when I heard the home phone ring. Now, normally we didn't answer the home phone, as most calls were scam calls like telemarketers or robocalls or people asking for my dad. But I figured messing with the scammer would be a nice distraction from cleaning the counter. I picked up the phone, but there was no answer. I said hello into the phone once again, and this time, there was a faint, deep laugh on the other end of the line. Keep in mind that I'm not the type of person to put up with prank calls, so I told him that if he called this number again that I would call the police. What he said next is something that'll never get off my mind. "I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs, Felix." My heart sank into the pit of my stomach, and I hung up the phone and immediately went outside to dial 911. They did a thorough sweep of the upstairs, but didn't find anyone up there. However, they did find the window to my parents' bedroom smashed open. This happened to me when I was in my early years as a teenager. I was 14 years old, and I was staying at my grandma's house for the weekend as she had lived far from us at the time and we didn't see her often. She lived way out into the country, and for some reason she didn't drive even though it seemed convenient for her, especially living isolated. One day, my grandma told me that she was going to her local grocery store to pick up a few things and asked if I wanted to come. The grocery store was about a 6-mile long walk from my grandma's house. And with me being a lazy and boring kid, I refused and figured I'd just watch some shows on TV. My grandma was 84 at the time, and surprisingly, as old as she was, she still had a lot of strength in her, which is why she took long walks. Fast forward a few hours later, it was now past 6 and the sun was starting to set. I was on the TV watching a SpongeBob episode, when I hear what sounded like faint laughing coming from outside. I lowered the TV to see if I could hear it again, and when I did, I could confirm that there was indeed somebody out there. However, there was something very off-putting about the laughing. It was hard to describe, but I remember it sounding like a little girl's laugh with no language skills. It was freaky as hell, and I got up to look through the windows to see if anyone was out there. But to my surprise, there didn't seem to be anyone. My instincts told me to call out to whoever was there, or at least open the door, but I was naturally afraid at this point. 5 minutes go by, and I didn't hear the laughing again, so I quietly opened the door to see if anyone was there. Nothing. The very second I took one step outside, I hear the laughing almost instantly coming from a big tree, much more louder than before. I didn't even dream of looking behind that tree to see who was there. All I did was go back inside and lock all of the doors and continued watching my show. I have yet to hear that laugh since, and I haven't told anyone else about this. Till this day, I still wonder what would have happened had I walked over to that tree to see who or what was there. When I was 15, I moved in with my aunt and uncle as my parents had recently gotten separated due to reasons I won't go into. Therefore, my aunt and uncle took me in to go live with them. Both my aunt and uncle worked in the medical field at the time, and their shifts would often change from time to time, meaning I would be home alone for some time. My uncle never got me a babysitter, as he didn't baby people and figured as long as he trusted me that it would be fine to let me stay alone. One evening, both my aunt and uncle were doing their nightly routine of working while I was at home watching a movie trying to take a nap on the couch. For some reason, I always had a hard time falling asleep on nights like this, so I probably laid there for about a good half hour or so when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to my left and saw a man looking through our window. Our living room window is massive, you might as well consider it as a glass wall. Now, we have an alarm system, but the only time the alarm goes off is if the glass breaks, and I couldn't move to call the police as our home phone was located in the kitchen and I didn't want to be spotted by him. Of course, I immediately freeze and try not to be noticed, but it seemed as if he didn't know I was there. He was not a pleasant-looking man. I saw craze in his eyes, indicating that he was on something. But I still laid there watching him. He wore a black jacket and some torn jeans, and his hair was a mess. As nice as our neighborhood was, we had a few homeless people roaming the area. Eventually, after taking several looks inside, he walked off into the trees, and that's when I noticed sticking out of his right pocket was a handgun. I ran upstairs into my room and stayed up there for the remainder of the night. I told my uncle about this, and I remember him going out the following week to install a camera system. A little bit of context as to what made this story absolutely terrifying. When I was around 15, my family and I moved into a big 2-storied house that was built back in the 80s. Even though the house was fairly odd, it was still a decent-sized house appropriate for a family of 4. The only problem I had about it was the blatantly obvious antique design of the house. It was nice, but the design gave off such an eerie vibe to us kids, and we didn't exactly know as to why. Anyway, one night, my parents had gone out to dinner for their 10th anniversary, and I was home watching over my little brother Kevin, who was only 2 at the time. During this time, we were still in the process of unpacking our things into our new rooms, so we slept down in the den for the time being. I slept on a cot, while Kevin slept in his crib. I'd say that we were both fast asleep by 10, when I woke up to Kevin crying his eyes out. Normally when he cried, he most likely wanted a snack or something, but that immediately checked out when I saw him pointing at the open door that led into the pitch-black basement. I'd say right then and there, I started feeling extremely cold, which didn't make sense as this was during the summer and our AC was broken. I had this negative energy around me, like a sense of dread. Then, clear as day, I heard the sound of a child laughing. I grabbed Kevin and brought him upstairs with me, and we slept in the living room couch for the remainder of the night. Till this day, I truly believe that what we experienced that night was completely paranormal. I never found anything in that basement the next day. About 6 years ago, something happened to me while I was home alone that I'll never forget. Because of this, I had to get therapy for 5 months straight, and this is why I will never stay home alone again. I was 12 years old at the time of this story, and this took place in my hometown in Weymouth, Massachusetts. It's a very small town, as there was nothing to do, and the antique design of the town made it look also boring and old. One weekend, my mom had told me that she had recently gotten a call back from a job that she applied to, and that she had to go into Boston for an interview. She trusted me to watch over the house for a few hours while she was gone. With me being only 12, she went over the rules most parents tell their children when being left alone. Don't go outside, don't answer the door for anybody, etc. She then left in a hurry, and I had the house to myself for a few hours until she got back. With nothing to really do or anywhere to go, I simply threw myself onto my bed and flipped on my TV to the cartoons. About an hour later, I go downstairs while on my way to the kitchen, and I notice somebody standing in our backyard. He was facing off in the opposite direction with both of his hands in his pockets as if he were waiting for the bus. At first, I didn't get too worried as a few men had been coming by to fix a pipe on the side of the house that had a major leak. However, this guy looked nothing like a plumber or anyone who specializes in repairing pipes for that matter. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and a gray hoodie that surely covered most of his face. I don't even remember thinking twice about it. Anyway, I had went back upstairs and finished up my TV shows and decided to go take a shower as I had a birthday to go to later that night. I turn on the shower and go in for about 15 minutes. I take really long showers, so whenever I'm home alone, I go mental. After I was done, I turned off the water, and that's when I hear the front door open. My first thought was that it was my mom finally home from her interview, so I shoot her a text asking if she was home, and within a minute, she replies with, "Hey honey, I just got finished with the interview. I'm driving home now. Is everything okay?" That's when I get a sharp pain into the pit of my stomach, knowing that someone was in my house. And it wasn't my mom. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but I take a deep breath to compose myself and wrap a towel around me and slowly creep down the steps and try and see who it was. Looking back, that was probably the most stupidest decision of my life. As I reached the bottom step, I peeked around the corner and felt my blood run cold. There was a man, about 6'6", and looked to be in his mid-30s, standing in my kitchen. He was holding a large wrench in his hand and was looking directly at me as if he knew I was coming down the stairs. Then, very quietly, he said 5 words that still haunt me till this day. "Run while you still can." That's when I lost it and started screaming while running up the stairs and into my room while locking the door. All the while, I began hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping at my door. I knew he was there because I could see the outlines of his shoes at the bottom of the door frame. He began banging on the door loudly with a wrench, demanding me to let him in. At this point, calling the police wasn't an option, so I did the only thing I could do. I slowly opened my window and jumped out onto the patio floor. Even though I tried to break my fall, I still landed with some minor injuries. I felt as if 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of me when I see my mom's car pull into the driveway. I run crying to her, explaining the situation, and she immediately takes out her .45 she keeps in her purse and walks into the house. I'd like to mention that my mom had served 3 years in the military, so she knew what she was doing. I heard 2 very loud gunshots from inside my room, followed by yelling and screaming. Police had been called by my neighbors, who apparently had heard the gunshots, and police then took this nightmare guy away. The look the man gave me as he was forced into the backseat of the police car was something that I'd never forget. It was a look of pure hatred and anger, Like, the first thing he would do once he got out of jail would be to come back for me. We had since moved out of that house a month later due to the constant paranoia I was having, which eventually made me have mental therapy as previously mentioned before. I don't know what the man's intentions were, but if he had a wrench with him, chances are he was probably planning on doing a lot more than just robbing us. My name is Danny, and this happened to me when I was living with my dad at the time of this story. My dad worked 2 jobs, and I was only 18 at the time and was a part-time college student, so my dad would oftentimes be called into work while I was either at home or school. This particular night, my dad had been called into work for one of his jobs for a possible storm emergency and wouldn't be back until the next day. This was during hurricane season, so him getting called into work wasn't too big of a surprise. Anyway, my dad had already left for work and I was laying on the couch watching a movie while somewhat enjoying the sound of rain and thunder from outside. At one point during the movie, I for some reason fell asleep and woke up to the sound of the home phone ringing. This wasn't too sketchy as we get calls almost every day, most of the time either from scammers or people looking for my dad through his work. I hesitated and got up to answer the phone and said hello, still in my drowsy state. However, the only thing I heard was a slight static from the other end of the line. The rest was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I then heard what sounded like faint crying. I said hello one more time into the phone, and this time I got a response. There was a girl on the other end that sounded around 5 or 6 judging by her voice. She sounded distressed and scared. Then, clear as day, I heard these exact words. "Help me. I've been taken. I've been missing for 3 years." I told her to stay on the line with me and then I dialed 911 from my iPhone. All I told the operator was just to listen. I asked the girl where she was located, but with her being so young she could only describe the house to be small and white. She explained that she was in a dark room left alone. All of a sudden, the sound of a door opening with force broke the silence and the girl began to scream before hanging up. The operator took down every little detail she tried giving us and thanked me for informing her. All the while, I was texting my dad about the situation and he told me to stay calm and call the cops again and give our address for further explanation. The cops did end up coming to my house and I was being questioned for about half an hour before they finally left. The police never did find out who that little girl was or where she was calling from, as it would have been very difficult to trace, but they did all they could. My heart aches for that child, and I hope she's doing alright, but I still have my doubts about that. This story happened a few months after Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico, leaving most of the island without power, water, and telephone systems. During this time, I was living alone in the ground level of a small apartment complex in the middle of a rural area. I didn't have a power generator at the time, so most of my things were charged via solar panels. One night, I was suddenly woken up by a loud blood-curdling scream from outside my window. I couldn't make out the words the person was saying, or rather screaming. I thought it was a person needing help, but I quickly discovered that it wasn't. At first, I heard the screams from afar, but then the screams became louder and louder until it reached one of my windows. It was then when I discovered that it wasn't a cry for help, but rather gibberish. I saw a shadow of a man in the window thanks to the moonlight that night. It was a relatively tall man. He began to tap on my window while screaming gibberish again and again. At this point, I quietly grabbed a knife from my kitchen and without making a sound, I checked the window once more, and he was still there, still screaming gibberish. The neighbor's dogs began to howl as in response, and it was horrifying. After what I could describe as the 10 longest minutes of my life, the man finally left. I waited a while and then grabbed a cell phone that I kept turned off for emergencies and dialed 911. After a few minutes, the police came, but they never managed to get the man.